Welcome to the second program in our new Design Talk series, Create, Connect, Amplify. Create, Connect, Amplify presents stories of urgent and creative problem solving, creates a place to talk about how designers and design's rigorous research and dedication to efficacy can address pressing problems of our current world, and shares inspiring stories of design's power to achieve radical and far-reaching change. My name is Lauren Wilson, and I'm your host this morning from the Goethe-Institut, Washington. And thank you again for joining us for this exciting event. Before we start the presentation, I would like to point out a few things so we can have an enjoyable experience all together. First, please note that this meeting is being recorded as we want to make it available on our YouTube channel for everyone who couldn't join us today. If you stay in this meeting, you agree to being recorded. Second, please mute yourself, keeping in mind all of the hard work that went into making this program happen. We invite you to ask questions in the chat, and we will do our best to answer as many of them as possible. We also encourage you to connect with your fellow attendees in the chat. Additionally, if you're having technical issues, you can direct message Raleigh Joiner or Goethe-Institut, parentheses Raleigh Joiner, to help you figure out anything you need. Also, if you please change your name and add your pronouns as well. Now I am pleased to introduce Diane Holton, our curator and host for this series. Diane is a senior deputy art director at AARP, where she oversees creative for The Girlfriend, Sister's Letter, and The Ethel. She routinely contributes designs to AARP, the magazine, and specifically cover stories. Her background includes book design, branding, retail installation, styling, and footwear design. All right, take it away, Diane.
Thank you, Lauren, for the warm introduction. And again, welcome everyone this morning for joining us for this series, Create, Connect, and Amplify. Today, we're focusing on designing with disability in mind. So get your pen, your paper, and your pixels ready for a really informative discussion with local artists here. As Lauren said, please feel free to use the chat to interact with each other, comment or submit questions. And we will have probably a little bit of time to have those questions answered because our guest has literally a presentation that's chocked full of amazing and interesting information as it relates to disability. So that said, let me introduce them. Jennifer White Johnson is a DC, or rather Maryland-based designer. Baltimore. I don't know if I said it right, Jennifer, because I'm not technically from here, but you'll correct me. Anyway, she is a Baltimore-based designer, educator, and disability justice advocate. Her work focuses on the intersection of content and caregiving with an emphasis on redesigning ableist visual culture while amplifying BIPOC disabled creatives. Jennifer is also a wife and a mom. She holds an MFA in graphic design from the Maryland Institute College of Art and a BA in visual arts from the University of Maryland in Baltimore County. For the past 10 years, she has taught as an assistant professor of design and visual culture at Bowie State University. But currently, she is a guest lecturer at the University of Minnesota College of Design. Jennifer's work includes design and photography. Jennifer's work, which includes design and photography, has been featured in a plethora of places, namely the Washington Post, Afropunk, CNN, Teen Vogue, and is permanently archived in the library of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, as well as Princeton University, the National Museum of Women in the Arts, located right here in DC, and many other places. In 2021, she was listed as 20 Latina artists to watch on Today.com, which is, for those that don't know, Today.com, it is the Today Show. I could go on and on with all these accolades about Jennifer, but we'll never get to her presentation. So let's go ahead and give Jennifer White Johnson a virtual hand clap or wave or tap in the chat or on screen. All right, Jennifer. So welcome. Welcome. Is your mic on?
Hey, yes, my mic is on. Good morning, everybody. Oh my goodness. Thank y'all so much for joining me this morning. you know, for some folks such as myself, you know, I know getting up in the morning is like a full-time job and it takes a lot of spoons. So I really appreciate y'all like holding space for this conversation. Just a quick image description of myself for folks who have low vision or who have any kind of vision impairments. I'm coming to you from Baltimore, Maryland, the tribal land of the Piscataway people. I'm in my upstairs home studio, and I have caramel cinnamon brown skin, and I'm wearing my favorite orange headband, and my Tupac collaged earrings. And I'm wearing a black t-shirt that says I'm not here for the erasure of my history or culture or my identity, by Black Vibe Tribe. And I have a gap in my teeth, and I'm wearing my hair in a little ponytail. So thank y'all so much for just holding space again, for hanging out with me. And, you know, I'm ready to have a really beautiful, intimate conversation. So, yeah.
Yay.
Yay.
We're glad. We are very glad that you are here to have this conversation and some dialogue about the disability community. I can't say that I am an expert of that, and I don't know how many people in the virtual room are, but of course we always welcome having conversations with individuals that live and breathe in that space. So Jennifer, I can't remember exactly how we met. Do you remember?
I think that we met in 2015 at an AIGA conference in New Orleans.
Oh,
and
okay.
It was like you, and it was my first time meeting Hadia Williams. It was I had already knew Jermaine Bell, and so it was the first time that we were able to like connect. And I'm naming other amazing Black, you know, DMV and Baltimore designers, and it was just a really beautiful space to just kind of, there wasn't many of us, you know, many Black and brown folk at that conference at that time. And so it was just really beautiful to just see so many folks of color being uplifted. Like Andrea Pippins was there presenting, and Dee Nichols and Antoinette Carroll. It was my first time just really able to kind of find a really beautiful tribe of like grown designers.
Yeah.
and Eddie Opara was there speaking, and a lot of other folks. And you were just like buzzing, you know, everywhere. It was just so great to interact with your energy, with your spirit, and to see that I had like a fellow, you know, just like a really beautiful soul, like that felt just as passionate about design as me, and who wanted to continue to open up space for other educators and other just Black women designers. And so that was when we met, and I knew, I was like, you know, this you know, woman is like fierce and on fire, and I want to like spend my life like kind of like in her orbit, you know?
No. That's what I was racking my brain at. I actually was like, oh, I know, I remember. And then I was like, no, I don't. But I remember I had an agenda at that conference. So for people who don't know what AIGA is the Professional Association for Design. It started off as really focusing on graphic designers and including graphic designers, but it's expansive. It's much bigger than that. And there are about 72 chapters in the US. It is a US-based organization, design organization. And one of the largest chapters here is in DC. So I did meet you, Jennifer. Now I think it's all coming back in New Orleans. I think I was like maybe volunteering at the conference, and I had an agenda, and the agenda was to meet Eddie Opara and bring him to DC, which successfully happened. Shout out to all the people that Jennifer mentioned, because I think a couple of them are here in the virtual room. So thank you for tuning in, and also continuing to support Jennifer's efforts and design and Black designers. That being said, can you briefly tell me how you define yourself? Like, since we're talking about disability, you know, and I need to slow down, I realize, since we're talking about disability, just so that people can hear me and the captioning can catch up. But since we're talking about disability, how do you define yourself? I mean, I know that I consider myself like a Black woman, able-bodied, with some privilege to be able to navigate and move, you know, in the space of design and other areas. How do you define yourself?
Yeah, thank you. First, I define myself as an Afro-Latina, neurodivergent, disabled woman who identifies as having ADHD, living with ADHD. I'm very hyperverbal, so I do speak quickly, and I will do my best to speak slowly. And I also have an autoimmune disorder, which really attacks my immunity, which attacks my metabolism, and it's rooted in like thyroid dysfunction. And so I've been living with that autoimmune disorder, which is like Hashimoto's or Graves' disease, kind of like a combination of the two, since I was 21. And I've been kind of like learning to kind of live my life and like be careful like what I'm eating and how I treat my body. And sometimes I get heart palpitations and anxiety attacks, and just kind of like existing in that space, and realizing that, you know, as a Black woman, we're already under a lot of like duress and oppression. But imagine living with a disability and, you know, having to constantly like justify and defend like your behavior, the way that you move, the way that you exist. And then, you know, existing as a parent as well. You know, having like a child who is autistic, who was born, you know, very premature. He was only 2 pounds when he was born. And so, you know, kind of, you know, continuing to define myself, to be authentic with all of those struggles and all of those narratives of survival, you know? So yeah, it's a very intersectional space that I live in always, with all different types of like comorbidities existing in different spaces. And I also wanted to say, for my fellow neurodivergent people, if you have like your little fidget toys, I've got my little unicorn poppet, my little rainbow unicorn poppet. Feel free to bring them out. So, because I get a little fidgety. So yeah.
No, this is good. See, and you know what, you learn something every day, because I did not realize that you had a Graves' disease. I knew about the ADHD, but I didn't know about Graves' disease. So that leads me to the next thing. The next kind of thing I want to talk about is invisibility versus visible disabilities. Because if I were to just look at you, see you on the street, I would think, oh, she's able-bodied. She's not walking with a cane. She's not walking with a limp. She doesn't have, you know, a twitch in her eye. You don't physically look disabled. So can you talk a little bit about the challenges of that in the community, in the disabled community, of being invisible and disabled? And I'm sorry, I can't talk. Visible and invisible.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for, you know, holding space for that question. And yeah, and it is something that, you know, folks with varying disabilities have to constantly, you know, live with and justify. But you don't look, you know, disabled, or you don't look autistic, or you don't look like you have ADHD. And that just goes to show you that there's just so much of like a stigma that is very much rooted in disability existence, and, you know, kind of like existing with different body minds. And it really just starts with a dialogue and holding space for, like you said, like folks who have invisible, non-apparent disabilities, and realizing that they're telling the truth. Like they have access needs, they need accommodations. And oftentimes the struggle in the Black and Brown communities, or for just marginalized poor people, like we don't always have access to getting those diagnoses. We don't kind of like live in this privileged space where we have like, you know, access to equitable healthcare to kind of quote unquote validate like our disabilities. And that makes it difficult too, because everyone's were like, well, we need proof, like we don't believe you. And it's like, well, these are my access needs. And sure, like whether I have my diagnosis or not, like you have to believe me, like you have to believe the data, especially since ADHD the common myth is that ADHD is overdiagnosed when it isn't. It's underdiagnosed, especially in, you know, Black and brown communities, especially within women. You know, so it's often linked to, oh, well, post-traumatic stress, or she's just crazy, or, you know, she's just kind of, you know, she doesn't know how to like handle her behaviors. And it's like, no, I have like an actual, like legitimate, body mind that operates differently. So.
And how has that as a mom, how has that been leading it? Have you found it easier to be able to advocate for your son because you yourself are disabled, not consider, but are disabled? Or is it still very much challenging?
I mean, it continues to be challenging, you know, to be completely authentic, but because I believe strongly in, I don't want to perpetuate the myth of oppression that is so often very much a part of that stigma. Like, oh, you must be so sad. You're struggling so much with like living with ADHD, and your son is autistic. Like, oh, it must be so hard for you. But actually, we have a lot of really amazing days where we're constantly bonding and getting to know each other, focusing on a lot of autistic joy, a lot of disability joy, Black boy joy, Black disabled joy.
Yeah.
And I've realized that it's really up to disabled folks to really kind of like take up the helm, to kind of uplift like their culture, to kind of help break those stigmas. And if anything, I feel more authentic and more, I feel more alive because I'm able to be transparent as a disabled mom, because like I understand my son and he understands. It's like I'm finding a lot of similarities now, and I've been hearing a lot of disabled parents say those same things. It's like it took for me to like, you know, invest a lot of time in like my own son's disability for me to discover like my own. And I'm like, wow, like, oh, so yeah, like I have ADHD, like, and it's really, it's been really beautiful to kind of like find that, like that coexistence, that relationship, and to kind of find myself through my kid. You know, I mean, you know, so I'm validating that. Yeah.
No, it's wonderful. It really is wonderful to see. And I've seen over the years how you have really ramped up disability in your design work, not just like spotlighting individuals, but also spotlighting the various disabilities that are out there that you either have or others have. And I would love for people to kind of see some of that work, see some of your work, and kind of hear your personal journey as you navigated, you know, your own thing. So if it's okay, can we pivot to that?
Yeah.
Also, I know it's important, you know, as a designer to include certain language, not just certain visuals, but also certain language. So I'm hoping that through this presentation, people also understand that language plays an important role in the visuals as well.
Yep. Yeah. Thank y'all so much. I'm going to share my screen really quick. I just have like a little keynote. This is me. And I just wanted to, you know, make sure that everybody knows, like, that's joining us, that this is a safe and brave space, and no shade, no judgment. Continue to be open-minded and open-hearted, and ready to just kind of unpack and unlearn some things, and also learn things. I am an artist and a designer, and I do have my own kind of, you know, strategy and methodology for designing. And I always appreciate if there's no shade or judgment in my own approach. And content warning, I will be talking about ableism and anxiety, suicide, racism, and how it just impacts a lot of Black and brown disabled folks. As you know, as we mentioned, I am a mother to a premature child. And so, you know, just the Black mother, you know, mortality rate, it's a really heavy space, you know, when we're thinking about the relationship between motherhood and just oppressive healthcare system that's not always equitable. And so it's been a really kind of heavy space. And my son is disabled. He was born 2 pounds, 15 ounces, and he's premature, and he is, autistic. And I blamed myself. I was like, is it something that I did? Is it something that I caused? Did I did I not take care of myself enough while I was pregnant because of my own kind of like disabilities? But just to know that to talk about disability, it's okay. Like, you don't necessarily have to be ashamed of, kind of living in a different body mind. And I just want to like establish that as we start to understand these differences about ourselves, that we don't have kind of like, that we don't live in this body of shame. And that to understand that it's not a bad word. So just know that, if you're interacting with anyone who exists differently and who, is disabled, you can actually say that, especially if they're okay with that. And as I'm kind of like establishing different aspects of disability, that it's important to understand that there's different models of disability. There's a lot of you already have like your definition and your own positionality of what you think disability means. And then of course there's like the medical definition, oh, like, well, you have ADHD or you're autistic, like you need to be cured, like you need to be fixed. And my definition of disability isn't very much rooted in that at all. It's also not rooted in this charity model. But a lot of people, and the last definition is like, there's the passing model, a person with a disability downplaying, how they live in order to kind of mask so that they can kind of assimilate into kind of like this quote unquote normal culture. And what ends up happening is folks don't get the accommodations that they need. They don't get the support systems because they're not comfortable identifying as disabled when, indeed, like society should build a structure that is accessible to make them feel comfortable about like just living differently. And some of my, as we're talking about Black and Brown women in disability culture, a lot of people forget that Fannie Lou Hamer, who is like a huge like inspiration to my life and like my social justice, just existence, she underwent forced sterilization, the Mississippi appendectomy, she was beaten in jail, she suffered from PTSD, kidney damage, and she had acquired polio at the age of 6 and she walked with a limp. But yet, she used that lived experience. She used everything within her body, within her mind, within her soul to get people out, to get them out to vote, to make sure that Black people were seen as equals and not as subhuman. And all of the work that she did, I don't want to believe that it was in vain. So, especially when you have stories like this, like Isabella, Izzy Trishanor, 10 years old, late last year, Black and autistic, bullied by her classmates and her teacher in Utah. So really, just racist school system in certain counties. And, you have academic systems that aren't holding space for the acceptance. They see Black children as the enemy. They fear them. They don't hold space for their magnificence, for their excellence. And, stories and narratives like these are what constantly are like fueling and stigmatizing, like, well, something must have been wrong with her if she was autistic and if she had a disability. So it wasn't anything that the school system was doing. There was something wrong with her and her family, like that's ultimately, where people feel justified in kind of like explaining this narrative. And in essence, no, it's not, there's no reason why she should be gone. She should have gotten the support that she needed. And all of this is very much rooted in ableism, a system that assigning, value on people's bodies and minds based on, society's constructed ideas of normality, productivity, desirability, intelligence, eugenics, anti-Blackness. This is very much what Black and disabled people have to constantly exist in this very oppressive ableist space. But you don't even have to be disabled to experience ableism. You know, even if you are living with, you know, a different type of like mental disability, or you're just kind of like existing in a different kind of just body mind, like, and if your specific craft isn't tied to any sort of like capitalist, you know, space, folks are going to deem you as invaluable. They're going to deem you as not worthy, as disposable. And this is, you know, this is very much, this really came alive a lot through COVID. I mean, and look, we're able to kind of meet virtually. We're able to have this discussion. And it took the disability community to remind people, hey, like, we've been doing it this way for ages. And now you're catching on and realizing that we can actually have these, you know, exchanges online. And so I knew that with all of that heaviness, with all that oppression, with like, you know, my traumatic birthing experience, you know, Knox being premature, you know, us, you know, finding out about his, you know, autistic diagnosis when he was 3, and everyone telling me, you know, how I need to kind of move forward as a parent. And I'm like, no, like, I'm not going to live in this fear. Fear is the enemy. Hope is everything. And acceptance is really how it happens. And if only folks didn't fear Isabel, you know, the 10-year-old girl in Utah who was bullied, if only they accepted her, she may still actually be with us. And my son is going to be 10 in October. And I don't want to see that happen to him. And so I really wanted to be able to just kind of use design, use like photography and all the things that I love to continue to understand, like, what is this, like, autism, like neurodivergence, like, what does this mean for me? Like, how am I going to move forward with making sure that, like, our stories are shared, making sure that our authentic narratives just really are uplifted. And I started doing research, and this is in 2019. As you can see here, you know, main characters in US children's literature, you know, the disability ratio was 3.4 books. So a lot of disabled folks don't always have the agency to tell their own stories, and their stories, it almost has to be inspiration porn. It also it almost has to be very much rooted in, oh, but by the end of the book, you know, this disabled character was cured, or here's how we can fund to treat this disabled person so that they no longer have this disability. There's a lot of narratives that are very much rooted in disability oppression. And as you can see, main characters in US children's literature, 41.8%. It's like our society would rather feel very comfortable with just seeing a very kind of like one frame type of child versus letting those beautiful narratives that examine disability in a beautiful way, having that be kind of at the helm of visual literature. And so I knew that I wanted to use my designs to begin to break those stigmas, you know, to focus on access as care. You know, some of the most heaviest issues that the disability community are facing right now is poverty, housing, ableism, eugenics, inaccessible intersectionality, you know, and we have, you know, more than half of disabled Black people in the United States being arrested by the time they reach their late 20s. And so I knew that I started to have to challenge this design system. I knew that I wanted to propel language justice, you know, and I would come up with these statements. I would have like really interesting collaborative conversations with my other disabled friends. And I started to begin playing with like iconography and symbols. And so here you see a Black power fist, a vector illustration with a bold statement, Black disabled lives matter. You also see another statement here in the center: to be pro-neurodiversity is to be anti-racist. It's like making sure that if we're talking about Black lives, we need to talk about all Black lives, like all different types of, you know, Black folks that exist in different body minds. And, you know, Black people with disabilities, you know, we're less likely to identify with disability labels, you know, because there's a history associated with Black disabled folks. I mean, that goes back to slavery, you know, I mean, Black slaves who had disabilities were viewed as disposable. So either they were murdered, or they were just kind of sold off and sent to the circus. I kid you not, like they were viewed as chattel. They were viewed as, you know, circus material, people who could be, you know, objectified. You know, so the data is out there. Folks with disabilities, you know, hide like their existence at work because they're afraid that they'll get fired. They're afraid that they'll get discriminated against. So not only do we have to be afraid to work, to be accepted in the workplace, but just walking around in our neighborhoods, you know, taking a walk, you know what I mean? And if we're living with bipolar, if we're living with post-traumatic stress, we have to be in fear of, you know, being shot. We have a fear of someone calling the cops on us. And these are the things that I have to constantly exist with, like the labor, the oppression, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting. And so I knew that I had to like use my design to just uplift autistic joy, to kind of help to build this world that I want to see my son exist in, that I want to see his friends exist in, that I want to see other Black and brown kids exist in. And so a lot of these designs were developed in 2018, 2019. And then through the pandemic, when folks realized that Black designers existed again, and, you know, although we've been around for ages, a lot of folks finally started to like pay attention in 2020. And that really allowed for me, that gave me a lot of confidence. You know, the pandemic forced a lot of us to slow down, and it forced a lot of people to finally pay attention to these really, you know, really heavy narratives of Black and brown disability culture, and how we need to pay attention to the folks who are the true leaders in the disability community. Like one of the principles of disability justice is, you know, we need to hold space for leadership of the most impacted, not necessarily the folks that are talking at disabled people or behalf of disabled people, but who's speaking with us, who's speaking alongside us, and who's letting us build those conversations, who's letting us build these narratives that are reflections of our lived experience. And so some of the stuff that you see here are things that my son and I have created together, a reflection of conversations that I've had with disability communities. Some of them are like developed from hashtags that have like gone super viral, like on Twitter, that were started by disability communities, like My Disabled Life is Worthy, Black Autistic Lives Matter. I started just getting more comfortable playing with language justice. So create more anti-ableist spaces, very simple, very straightforward designs that are easily translatable for like alt text, and for, you know, screen readers, and, you know, that aren't super complicated, but that will kind of like hit folks hard and heavy. And I knew that celebrating Black disabled joy had to really continue to propel like that narrative. And so these next few slides are just, you know, just more beautiful artwork that holds space for Black and brown disabled narratives in disabled families, because we don't really see a lot of just representation in the media. It's like very like a small percentage of what we do see. And welcome to Knox First, where every family's experience is different, but the commonality is that our children are not burdens, and they did not ask for any of the challenges that they face. They depend on those who love to equip them to be successful and to reinforce the fact that they are incredibly special and don't need to be fixed. And so these next few slides just kind of hold space for that joy, for that freedom. We love to make zines. Zines are like a huge part of like my, you know, design craft and my design like narrative. And zines are like a really cool way to kind of engage kids with like storytelling and digital collage. And a lot of these we create digitally and by hand, and we have fun with like paper folding and picking out like illustrations and doodling. And the zine pack was like a really fun thing to just kind of put out there and to kind of share like our fun, authentic narratives, you know, like with the world. And so we played around with like, again, digital collage, photography, statements like believing in the freedom of being you and knowing that, you know, each day, like when my son gets up and goes to school, like he's loved. Like we're not telling him, you know, do your best because, you know, you need to be like everyone else or else you're going to be bullied. It's like, no, be you, you know, be who you want to be, because ultimately he's going to have to live with that as he interacts with his friends in school day, when he comes home from school in the afternoon. If we're telling him, you know, if we're constantly perpetuating the message of assimilation, and he's not going to feel comfortable existing, you know, like as his true self, just imagine what kind of trauma that's going to hold for him as he continues to just be him, you know. And so meaningful access, you know, it's an open-ended and long-term commitment to challenging the ableist culture of our work rather than only focusing on logistics. And I love this quote from Mia Mingus. So as I was saying, like, it's, you know, advocacy starts in a space that you're living each day, but self-advocacy, wanting to go out into the community and to like celebrate who you are, is super important. And so one of the like the fun design challenges that I do is like every new school year, I make a zine for Knox's teachers, for the staff, for his counselors. And this is how I'm using design directly with like the academic space, because this takes up a lot of my time. I have like my own personal practice, I teach, but mothering as an act of resistance is like my main priority and my main job. And that's the space that I'm in right now, is to make sure that he's okay as a 9-year-old kid in 2022. And so as you can see here in the zine, you'll see like where he lists like, these are my challenges, like, you know, sitting still for longer than 20 or 30 minutes at a time. Like I can't even do that. You know, I get easily distracted. And so writing this zine was almost like writing about myself. And it was great that we were able to kind of come up with this together. You know, narratives that, again, like let the teachers into like who he is, what he enjoys. And it was so great because, you know, kind of putting those designs out there, I was able to, you know, become friends with other moms of like all like cultural backgrounds, all walks of life, from all like states. And so this really beautiful mom from North Carolina named Chelsea, who has her own design practice, and she has her autistic son named Quest. And she's like, Jen, like, thank you so much for like making the zine about your son. I went and I got into InDesign, and, you know, I made my own zine for Quest so that we can kind of like, you know, have this good relationship with his teachers, so that we can continue to kind of like break these stigmas, to like normalize things like stimming, to normalize self-expression, to know that my stims aren't always super harmful. And stimming is just kind of like a form of fidgeting. It's like different body behaviors. Sometimes they can be self-harming. Other times they're just like a way of like expressing like anxiety, or maybe expressing like happiness. And, you know, whether you're flapping hands, whether you're fidgeting, whether you're jumping up and down, it's just a different language that neurodivergent people communicate with. And so it's always important to just know like, hey, this is like how I exist in my body and mind, but these are the things that I like to do. And this is how like we can help each other, you know, like understand like the way that I exist. So that was like, and to me, like, that's why I do what I do, to be able to kind of like hold space for these really beautiful collaborative opportunities that I can have with other parents. And then holding space for like, you know, the memory of like Black disabled folks who are no longer with us, kind of taking those icons, creating murals, helping to make like understanding that this design conversation doesn't live in a box. It doesn't only live like in a digital space. It can live out in the community. And so what continues to separate Black identity from the conversation, you know, deinstitutionalization, you know, in prison, you know, as prisons, you know, like, even though we no longer have institutions like where disabled people are kind of housed, but prisons are like the new institutions. Juvenile justice system is like, we're not holding space to kind of make sure that, our Black and brown kids are getting like the proper support, the proper rehabilitation that they need. And so these next few slides are just more examples of like how I'm trying to kind of bridge that conversation, making sure that collective access, that all the design work that is out there is just available to different disability spaces. And this is Carrie Gray and the National Melanated Association of Disabled Advocates, a really beautiful space. And I helped organize like a really beautiful visual campaign dedicated to disability leadership. The Black Disabled Lives, Black Power Fist symbol, which really helped to uplift so many of these, sensitive disabled narratives. It's actually a part of an exhibition at the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library in DC. There's, I think either on the 3rd or 4th floor, there's like a really beautiful exhibit that just uplifts DC culture from go-go, from activism, from zine making, DC punk culture. And so it's just really awesome to kind of be a part of that space. And there's like a little feature that shows, hey, like this is like a Black and disabled designer born in DC. And these are the conversations that she's wanting to continue to have. And here's just like another shot of that. So these just next few spaces, like Barack Obama, like retweeted like one of like the mock-ups that I had done for like the mural design, and just again, just holding more space for these conversations. And so my last slide is, I just got to move this thingy out of the way here, but disability justice can not only be about, dismantling systems, it also has to be about building our individual capacities to create, imagine, and produce, so making sure that we hold space for, letting the disability community build what we want to see. It's like so many tables ask us, it's like, sit at our table, be a part of our table, but they never ask us to build that table with them. They never ask us to like architect, to construct, to engineer like that table, and we need to remember to hold space for, hey, like, how are you kind of like moving alongside? How are you letting us build like our own systems, and so, these last few slides are just dedicated to organizations that you just should definitely support. Disabled in Here is a disability-led interview and stock image series celebrated by Black, Indigenous people of color. It's like for those of you that are, doing any kind of like publication design, or any kind of like, just design campaigns in general, and you want to make sure that you include, Black and brown disabled bodies in your graphics and in your visuals that you create, make sure you go to this space where you can actually, and the cool thing about this particular photo stock series is that it highlights not just disabled like life and culture, but everyone who's involved in the art direction are disabled. So this is like a disabled photographer who was a part of like planning this shoot. And then Black disabled creatives is like another really beautiful space to uplift tons of Black and brown folks that are out there doing community work, that are voiceover actors, that are performers, that are poets, that are writers, that are, UX designers that are involved in so many different forms of design. Started by Jillian Mercado, who's like an adorable, like amazing friend. And this was all started through the pandemic, these accessible spaces where folks could, hire like someone in the fashion or film entertainment, space, to be able to make sure that the representation is equitable. Just more spaces like AbleZine, more spreads from the, this amazing disability cultural magazine, ADHD trait cards created by Dr. Rachel Nduo from the UK. So there's a lot of really beautiful things that are being made by, Black and brown designers who are coming in full transparency, with our disability experience. So just know that there are a lot of things that are, that are out there. Alt text is poetry, made by Shannon Finnegan, to kind of help coach folks on, disability culture and how to make sure that your images and everything that you share online can be accessibly read for folks with low vision and screen readers. And also Shannon's work on museum culture and the inaccessibility of museum culture is amazing as well. Yes. And so to wrap up, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. Audre Lorde, cancer survivor, living with a disability, but still holding space for, her, for her truths. And she passed, I think it was in 1992. But I mean, she was speaking and publishing right up until, so, and caring for herself through her writings. And so she's one of my biggest inspirations. So thank y'all so much for holding space for my ramblings. Yes.
It's not ramblings at all, Jennifer, not at all. This is all food for our souls, and to help us continue navigating this world that we live in. So thank you very much, actually, for your time. And again, everyone give her a virtual clap, or a wave, or a nod, or a cheers, whatever you feel most comfortable with. On those lines, I mean, there's so much literally to unpack here. Excuse me, and I want to be sensitive to time. But that last slide was Audre Lorde, and Audre Lorde has a connection to Berlin, which I thought was really for a while, did not know, and then was like, oh, she does. So I know she's a huge fan of yours. Do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Yes. Oh, so it was really beautiful. As I was doing research for participating in this panel, it was so beautiful to kind of see, that she spent so much time in Berlin, traversing, through different spaces, talking so much about self-care, so much about just, disability autonomy. Mm-hmm. And if you haven't checked out the cancer journals, this is this book here, where it's literally just a diary that talks so much about how she refused to get breast reconstruction, and how she was looked down upon because of that. And people were like, well, you're not a cancer survivor ally. And she's like, yeah, but accepting me for me, and just I don't want to wear a fake prosthetic thing on my body. Yeah. Not knocking that, but she just wanted to be able to have the world accept her with her new body. Exactly. Yeah. No, so I really love that. Yeah.
No, mm-hmm. And that speaks again to the acceptance part. There were a few questions that came in, and thank you for providing the resources, because I think a lot of people definitely wanted those. So I'm going to jump into that, actually, to one of the questions that had to do with workplace, because I know that's something you and I talked about, and we were like, there's no way she's going to be able to get it all in. But there was a question is, what steps can we take in order to identify our disabilities and be more comfortable with them, especially in the workplace?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really starts with, what is how is the leadership creating a culture of care, of collective care? What kind of dialogues are you having with your disability folks, and not necessarily saying oh, well, here's what we're gonna do for you. It's no, what do you need? What are the accommodations that you need, and letting them help you come up with those different kinds of accommodations as well. I've had so many different conversations about this, and I think the best strategy is to kind of let those folks with that lived experience be a part of planning. So whether you design more flexible hours, or whether you allow folks more time to work from home. And this is what the pandemic really showed us, that we could still be productive. while at home, and we don't always necessarily have to be face to face, but also holding more space for the celebration of that disability culture and that different like way of existing. Like one thing that Square HQ does, they do a disability spotlight month where they will have like this really beautiful monthly kind of like huge festival fair where all of the disabled folks, like folks who identify as autistic or have a physical disability, exactly, like they'll actually kind of like bring in like their artwork or their zines, and they'll lead workshops on, hey, like this is like strategies or different things that like I use to kind of help me like in the workplace. So it's like you just need to make sure that those folks like within your spaces just feel like they have room to be authentic, and then give them the opportunities to like be open, because that like just creating that culture of openness, that culture of acceptance, like that's honestly like how that community will thrive, period.
Okay. Speaking of that, then how do you, speaking of like space, workplaces, someone had asked, and I gave them Anna E. Cook's link, but like, how do you, as a UX designer, what steps do you take to ensure that accessibility is part of your standard process? I felt like that was a question that I could go into more, you can go into, not necessarily you could go into more depth, but I think that there are some resources and people that are great for that, which is why I mentioned Anna, but also.
Right. Yeah. Also, this is like a really beautiful book too, Inclusive Design for a Digital World. So imagine or designing with disability in mind. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because this is by Regine Gilbert. And this is like a Black educator based in, New York.
Yep.
Definitely. Yeah. So I just want to uplift like her. There's not a lot of Black and brown folks like taking up space in the UX world, especially as we're talking about inclusive design. I would definitely start with this book because it goes over web and accessibility guidelines, and alt text, assistive technologies, benefits of understanding code and how like disabled people kind of like exist with those spaces, talks about augmented reality. It just talks about so many things. So definitely like hold space for this. Yeah.
And Regine is great. Follow her on Twitter. I don't have her Twitter handle at the ready, but Lauren from the Goethe-Institut has dropped in the link to this book in the chat. However, follow her on Twitter. She'll be here. I think actually she'll be here in a couple of weeks. She comes down to DC with some frequency actually. But yeah, follow her for additional tips in that space. The next question I want to ask you too is about your favorite campaigns. We talk about art and design, and you talked about, disabled people being at the helm of some of the creations out there, whether it's telling their own story or leading, other people's stories, being accepted, as being accepted like everyone else. So what are some of your favorite campaigns that are led by the disabled community?
Yeah.
Campaigns
awesome
or
question.
artwork.
Yeah, and so some of my favorites are definitely Studio Mucci. So Amina Mucciolo, pronouns they, them. They create these really beautiful, vibrant, like interior spaces that are filled with like so many, rainbows and like just fun doodles and uplifting like autism acceptance and advocacy because they identify as autistic. So make sure you check out Amina's work, A Rainbow in Your Cloud. And their work was actually completely copied and like culturally appropriated by Lisa Frank. And as cool and nostalgic as Lisa Frank is, they couldn't just pay a disabled Black designer to actually come in and collaborate with them. And that is the problem, Oh, someone goes, I'm wearing, print design by, So Amina is just freaking amazing. Yeah. So make sure you follow Amina and support so much of what they're doing because
I've actually shopped
it's colorful. Yes,
I
yeah,
shopped her website several years back. I was like so smitten with
yeah.
it. But yes, I'm sorry.
And I love how unapologetic they are.
Yeah.
And I mean, and I feel like that's the key. And someone in the chat, I want to make sure that I hold space for this question. Hannah Hendricks, how do you negotiate your spoons and getting stuff done? And the reason why this is like an important question is because I negotiate my spoons by doing things that are just gonna bring me so much joy and that are gonna uplift like just my soul. And that's what Amina does unapologetically. It's like the work has to be vibrant, colorful, because then it won't seem like busy work to me. It won't seem it like, as long as the design is holding a space of care for me and I actually feel joyful doing it. Like, we know what it's like to feel like so oppressed, and it's like, and we get stressed out, we get burnt out. And that's what teaching did for me for like 10 years. Like I felt like I was pouring so much into, you know, the self-care of everyone else and making sure that everybody else was okay, and I wasn't really focusing on me, and I wasn't very intentional about my design practice and how that was going to fulfill me. And so and I still struggle with like having enough spoons and being super busy, but I just make sure that what I do pour out, I make sure that it pours back in to me, whether it's making more connections, whether it's finding more community. If the work isn't gonna, you know, uplift me in that way, then I let it go.
You let it go. All right. Well, we have actually come to time, Jennifer. Believe it or not, it has gone so incredibly fast. I wish that we had another couple hours, honestly, to be able to go and, you know, be able to discuss a few more things. Because like I said, your presentation was packed full of like really great gems and just educational moments for this community and beyond. So again, thank you for your time. And we are going to put in the chat where people can find you, can continue to find and follow you for those who aren't already familiar with the amazing, wonderful, talented, beautiful Jennifer White Johnson. And hopefully they will connect with you with additional questions and any follow-up accolades. So again, thank you. And I'm going to turn it back over to Lauren. Again, thank you to the Goethe-Institut for allowing me to provide this space for everyone.
Yes, thank you so much to both of you. Thank you, Diane, for facilitating a wonderful and engaging conversation with Jen. And thank you, Jen, for sharing your time, knowledge, and talents, and really just bringing your whole self to this space this morning. I know it's not always easy. And thank you, everyone, for attending and for your wonderful questions. Today's program will be on YouTube, on Goethe's YouTube channel soon. There you can also find the recording from our first Create, Connect, Amplify conversation with Ambika Prakash that happened on February 4th. And also please follow the Goethe-Institut Washington on Instagram or sign up for our newsletter to find out about the next Create, Connect, Amplify program and others. So with that, I think we are finished. Thank you, everybody.